Hello guys, and in this video we'll be talking about the C++ compiling process. And before we begin, let me just say something that I really thank and appreciate the guys from the University of Dodoma. They've been the greatest watchers of my videos and I really appreciate that. So in this video, just like I said, we'll be talking about the compiling process. So I'm used and we are all used to watching me using the dev C++ IDE, but today things are going to be different. I'll be using native compilation methods and we'll be going in the old ways. I'll be having a text editor of which of my choice I'll be using the Visual Studio Code, and I'll be compiling with the minimum GW for Windows compiler, and I'll be using my terminal for the compilation process. So it's an easy thing and don't get amused of seeing me doing this, but it's something easy, but it's the one that is going to be useful in explaining the process that we are going to compile. So the first thing in compilation is writing the source code, and that's the steps taken. The first one is source code writing. So let's try and write some source code, and before we proceed with the next steps, we'll perform all the steps that are taken into compiling a C++ program using this minimum GW for Windows, and then we'll start there from in explaining. So I'm going to write a very basic C++ program that is not going to having any include statements, and the first thing is it's going to be having the main function, because that's where all the C++ programs have an entry for. It's going to return 0 because it's of integer type, and then just like that. That's the very basic C++ program I can write now, and I'm going to compile it. And by compiling, I'm going to use the g++ command, and then I'll say -o just to save the output as compile.exe, and then the file that I'm going to compile is compiling.cpp. So this is the source code, and let me rename this into compiling, not compile. Yeah, so our compiler has run, and as you can see in the very same folder, we have the compiling.exe file, which is an application that can be run from the command line by writing its name together with the extension, which is .exe for an executable. And as you can see, it has started and ended. The program does nothing than just creating a main function, and so it's the very basic program that we'll be using in this example. So that's how it happens. So you write a program in the text editor, Visual Studio Code as an example, then you compile it, and it's going to save your output in the very same folder. But that's not necessary. It may save in any other place, but for simplicity we're just going to use this very same folder. So that's the general process and the whole process that has already occurred, but there are some steps in between that we need to understand, and they're very important for software engineers and computer scientists. So let's move on to the next step and see what's after source code writing, what else happens. So we have the pre-processing stage. So when we compile a C++ program, the compiler, what it does is that it takes all the include statements and follows and looks for the files that have been included, and copies the content of the header files and pastes it at the exact place where the header file has been included. So it's just a copy and paste process, and in this process the resulting file is going to have the extension .ii. We'll see this soon, but for the case of our program, let's try and include something of our own. So we're going to include something custom, hashtag include. So let's include my header .hyper. So this my header is a custom header file that I'm going to create here, and I'm going to say my header .header file, and I'll save it in the very same folder, my header file. And then all the content of this is going to be a function which I'm going to say integer sum, just a custom function that I'm creating, integer a. It's going to be a function that sums two numbers, integer b, so it takes in two inputs, a and b, and returns return A plus B. So that's basically the whole header file, the content of the whole header file. And as you can see here, I've included it. This is the how we include the custom created header files. We put the quotation marks and not the triangular braces as we always use. So when we compile this program, compile, I mean G++ minus o compile.exe compiling.cpp. So this is the source code, compiling.cpp, and this is the output we are expecting, the name of the output that we want it to be. If you're not going to specify this compiling.exe, it's going to create a custom name or a default name, which is a.exe, and we do not want that, so we specify the output by writing compiling.exe. And if we compile our program, it still does the very same thing and creates a program that is compiling.exe, as you can see here in the folder, but we can see the output file that has come from the process of preprocessing. In order to view the output of the preprocessing stage, we're going to compile the same program, the same file, but with a different command, and it's going to be save minus temps, which means it's going to save all the temporary and intermediate files that are created before it creates the final executable. And if I run this program, this command, you can see that there are a couple of files that have been created, and at this process we are interested in the compiling.i. So as I said, in the preprocessing stage, the compiler just takes the content of the header file, as in our case it's this function int sum ab, and it returns a plus b. So this is the function that is in the header file, and in our cpp file we've just included the myheader.header file. So in the output of the preprocessing stage, we have this file that is called compiling.ii. This is the output that is going to be obtained after the preprocessing stage. And as you can see, our normal cpp file, its content is right here. It's the very same thing, but in the place where we included my header file, the contents of my header file have been copied and pasted here. So that's what is actually happening in the preprocessing stage. So moving on to the next stage, it's the process of compiling. In the process of compiling, it's still the same command that we run, and the file that we are currently interested in is this object file. So this object file contains a file, the contents of that have been compiled from this compiling.exe. After the compiler has combined all this, it does its things, and it converts them into the machine runnable code, but it's not usually optimized. So this object code contains contents that are from this compiling.i file, and it's usually in machine readable format, and it's not readable to human, and it's not in a good file format. As you can see, it says that the file cannot be displayed. It's either too large, or it uses binary or unsupported text encoding. So it's usually not human readable. So the compiling.object file usually has the machine form of all this code that we've just included and all that we've compiled. So that's the compiling process. I've just tried to simplify it so the process can be understandable to most of us. And after the compiling process, we come to the linking process. The compiled output is usually not able to run on its own. It requires some additional libraries so that it can create the final executable that can run independently on any machine or other supported devices. So we come to the process which is called linking, where the object file is combined with other code from the standard library, the C++ standard library, and other code that we've just included. In the in the object file, the functions usually are not placed there, but a reference to a function is placed. So in the linking process, the actual function is placed in the output file to make the program completely independent. And after the linking process, we come and obtain the exe, the exe is also not readable in this text editor because it is in binary format, but that is the actual output of our program, and that's the final stage of actual compiling. But in intermediate, there's something that is called compiling.s. It's a file that is generated just soon before the final executable is obtained, and this compiling.s is in assembly language. Assembly language is very close to machine language. As you can see, the content of machine language is of assembly language is here. We actually do not have a concern in machine language, but anybody who can understand the assembly language can actually read this file, and it's a actual source code that is very readable, and that's why we do not study the assembly language. It's actually complicated. As you can see, the code is not readable, it's not human friendly, but this is generated just before the final executable is created, and it's part of the temporary files that are created during the compiling process. So that's what occurs in the linking process, where we obtain the final executable. And another step is not actually necessarily in the compiling process, but it's loading, where we have it's not related basically to the compiler, but it's just a process where we call the executable. Let's say in our case it's called compiling.exe. When we call this function, there are two things that occur. When you call this program, I mean, there are two things that occur. The first thing is loading, and let's just combine to the final stage, which is executing. So loading and executing occur simultaneously. The first thing is that in the loading process, the actual executable is taken and loaded into the main memory, and then the processor has access to it, where it does its execution. So it's loaded into the main memory, and then it's executed by the processor, and that finalizes general steps of the compiling process of a C++ program. And basically any C related programming language has these basic steps. Just as a recap, we have the various steps, which are source code writing, preprocessing, compiling, linking, loading, executing. The output of source code writing is usually .cpp files or .h files. In preprocessing, we have the output of .ii files. In compiling, we have object files, .o files, and in linking, we have the final executable, which is .exe files. And thank you for listening. Stay tuned, and next week, or probably in the middle of this week, we'll be having the video on the journey of a software engineer in part 3, and it's going to be very interesting. Stay tuned. Thank you.